So I just wanted to create this quick video to explain postmodernism, which I think is an entirely overcomplicated concept and actually very simple to understand. So prior to what we call, modernism, which was the precursor to modernism, to postmodernism. We had society that was like very traditional, very rigid. Like religious values were really strong. There was a very clear cut class system, and in terms of things like writing and the expression of ideas, there were very not only fixed views but fixed ways of writing about those views. So a really good example is, like patriarchal values were really prominent prior to the 20th century. So obviously like male-dominated society. And again, even if we think about something like religion, like, especially in the West, like Christianity was very prominent and everyone was expected to believe that particular value. And it was very fixed. And then when people would write about those things, there was always like a very clear structure. So firstly, when you look at writing from that time, a lot of it's always, talking about the kings and the queens, like the upper classes. And then you've got things like, like the structure of it's very linear. So if we think about Shakespeare's plays, you've got, like a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's all very structured. And then there's, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of it, but there's lots of like rules that you had about the way you write poetry. It's got to have like this many stresses per line and beats per line. It's got to have this kind of rhyme and all these kinds of things. And it was so very, very black and white, very structured. And very prescribed, and everybody had to think this particular way and express themselves and write and paint and whatever in these particular ways. So what started happening in the early 20th century, when we sort of move into something like modernism, and then obviously by extension we go into postmodernism, is people just started challenging these. So when we look at ideologically, gender roles started being challenged. So rather than having just an acceptance for the patriarchy, things like feminism emerged, where it started being like, oh, well, hold on a second, like maybe women can actually equally participate in, intellectual realms, which they previously weren't considered to have the capacity to do and what have you. Again, often very much linked to religion. People questioned religion, and so things just a lot of things just started changing, and there wasn't this idea anymore that you had to just think this one way and then there was no other way of thinking about it. Things like fixed meanings, there were a lot of fixed things like truth was considered to be really black and white. Again, if we use that religion example, it's like they give you this really prescribed idea or way of living, like don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie. The difference between good and evil was just like this really clear distinction, like a person is either good or they're evil, and that's it. But as we've come into more of the 20th century, all that started changing, and we have this idea that things are a lot more fluid, and there are gray levels, right? So when if we watch something that's about a villain, like what movies will more likely do, and this again is kind of going into postmodernism, is they'll show things like, why did they become a villain? What happened to them growing up or in their life or whatever? What traumas have they experienced that have led to the particular behaviors that we consider bad? But, that gives us a fuller picture. So we don't have these moral absolutes anymore. It's more not fixed. You need to kind of understand the context and so many other things. So basically what we're looking at with postmodernism is it's challenging traditional ideas and ways of expressing yourself, or even ways of doing things. But I'm talking about expression particularly because that's then what we're talking about when with writing and with painting and with movies. So I'll throw this in there when you're doing comparative studies, certainly for Module A in Year 12, but you have some variation of comparative study between texts and context, in young years as well. What you're often looking at is that shift between those fixed views, those fixed values, to that changing, right? So the emergence of feminism, the emergence of philosophies like existentialism, which basically was a result of and I've got other videos on that you can go have a look at, but religion dissipating, people not really sort of prescribing to that sort of moral absolutes of religion, and instead going, oh, well, if there's no religion and there's no God and then there's then what's the purpose of life? Like, how are we supposed to live? And that's, again, there's all this questioning, there's all this like fluidity. Lots of other things came as a part of postmodernism as well. So you may be looking at a text where they're rewriting a text from a new perspective, such as from a previously silenced minority group. So a really good example of that is the Masol investigation, Hagseed, where, and look, you'll have really, even the way that we talk about Australia Day these days is very what we call postmodern or post-colonial, which is part of postmodernism, where there's a different perspective told. We don't just go, oh, well, Australia was discovered and yay for Australia Day. And now it's like, oh, well, that had a really big impact on the Indigenous population, and what are the ramifications of that? So actually really like delving deeper and looking at histories and looking at the past and things that we've just decided are fixed and absolute. We've gone, oh, actually, like maybe things have been left out, maybe perspective changes things, and we've ignored these other classes or these other minorities, these other racial backgrounds and their perspectives. So let's rewrite things. So there's a lot in the postmodern movement of like challenging those previous fixed views, fixed means of expression, and then reformulating them from a new perspective, whether it be, like writing from a more female perspective or, anyway, so I think you get the point. But, the key thing is that it's challenging the traditional ways of thinking and challenging traditional ways of expression to the point where you have this sense of fluidity. And you have this sense that nothing's fixed. So the way that you express, like you have a movie or a story or a poem, like it doesn't have to be in these really fixed ways anymore. It can be lots of different styles. You can go back and forward in time. You can start at the end and then go back to the beginning. Like there's just no prescription on how to express yourself. So again, what we're looking at is really like that fluidity and that almost freedom of expression that reflects the changing values and attitudes of the postmodern era.